This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I want to welcome everybody that is here. We have a few that haven't been here lately, and it's good to have you. And especially our new little one. It's good to see Mama and Baby here. Good to have you. We are continuing our study with the parables. We have this week and next week will be the last of them, and then we'll go on to something else. But I want to. How turned it on? How did it turn on? How about now?
I'm better.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Glad to have everybody here, especially those who are streaming on live on the internet. But it's good to have you here this morning. We are continuing our study in the parables. We have, like I said, this week and one more to go. We'll look at 3 today and the last 3 next week. And then we'll move on. The ongoing theme, last week we were in Matthew 23. This week we're going to be in Matthew 24. And the theme here that Jesus, you'll see throughout this chapter, is to be ready. Be ready. I know when my dad was nearing the end of his life and he realized it, he was wanting to get everything ready. He was wanting to get his affairs in order, and he was having me read through his will and get things straightened out and all that because he knew his time was short. His health was degrading really fast. And we see here Jesus is doing the same thing. Jesus is in perfect health, but he realizes, he knows that his days are numbered. Okay? And so he is doing everything he can to get the disciples ready for when he's gone. And so this is what he's talking about in this week and next week. But he's, again, trying to get everything ready. His last lessons and his information to the disciples before his death. And I want to look at chapter 24. I wasn't going to do the whole chapter. I was going to just hit a little bit, hit and miss. And then I ended up adding a couple of slides and to explain those. I needed to go back into the verses I had skipped. So we're actually going to end up reading the whole chapter. So just bear with me as we do that. We're going to start Matthew 24, verse 1. Jesus left the temple, and as you remember last week, he was in the temple. He had cleared the temple and then went in and was talking with the Pharisees. But Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to the buildings. Now, we don't know what the disciples were saying, what they were looking at, if they were looking at the architecture or just what it was, but they have stopped and for some reason, showing Jesus the temple, the buildings all around. But whatever it was that they said, but Jesus responded, "Do you see all these things?" He asked. "Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be torn down." Now Jesus, I think, is predicting the fall of Jerusalem. That's going to happen in the years 66 to 70 AD by Titus, because they're going to come in and destroy Jerusalem. Okay? So he's predicting what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen. Okay? And he's prophesying, to them that Jerusalem is going to be torn down, but he's not going to tell them when. Okay? Verse 3. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of this age?" This is the question everybody has, isn't it? Wanting to know when something's going to happen. You say, well, we're going to have a surprise. What is it? What is it? Well, this is going to happen. You're saying that this temple is going to be destroyed. Well, when is it? And what can we look forward to show that this is going to happen? And I want to just real quickly look at this map, and you can see here, this is Jerusalem and the temple, and the Mount of Olives is not that far away, just a little stroll and I didn't look at a topographical map to see if this is a mountain area or whatever, but it's not that far for him to have gone from Jerusalem up to the Mount of Olives. Verse 4. Now notice Jesus doesn't answer the question on when the temple of Jerusalem is going to fall. Or maybe he is describing what will happen in Jerusalem before the uprising and the tax, before its downfall. Have we heard of false prophets telling about the end of time? Yes, we have. I remember specifically when we first moved here in the early 90s, or in the mid-90s, there was a prophet, quote unquote, over in Montana. And she had gathered a bunch of followers, and they had built an underground shelter. And she had prophesied that, the Lord had come to her, and that day, the Lord was going to come on this day. And so they sold everything they had, gave all of the money to her. She bought all these supplies, and they went underground. And we sat here on the top watching. Well, there's the time. Nothing happened. And it was 2 or 3 days later, they opened the doors and they came out, and she said, well, the Lord came to her while they were underground, and he changed the day. Okay. All right. So we are seeing the things that he's going to be talking about here, today, that people are going to be prophesying about the end of times. Okay. But again, as we'll look at, we don't know the day or the hour that is going to happen. We just know the dates that have been told us and that they've been proven wrong. Starting in verse 4. Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name saying, I am Christ, and will deceive many. I don't know if you remember back in 1993 down in Waco, Texas, a man named David Koresh, who claimed to be Jesus. He was Jesus Christ reincarnated, and he had his little group of followers. Okay? So again, we're seeing things that Jesus is predicting here happening during our time frame. Verse 7. For nation will rise against nation. Back up to verse 6. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. And all these are the beginning of sorrows. Of course, there are wars and rumors of wars all the time. But what does Jesus say in verse 6? Do not be troubled. Don't worry. These things are going to happen. Okay? They have to happen before the end comes. There will be wars and famines and pestilence and earthquakes all over the world. All these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. All these things are going to happen, but they are not a warning of the end times. We will talk more about that in a few verses. And again, like I said, I changed my mind on what I was going to do. I was going to stop here and drop down. But instead, I'm going to summarize for time's sake. But I wanted to add a couple of slides to help with what we're going to be talking about later. But in verse 9, and they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray you, betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. Now, I want to stop there. We're going to be talking about here in a little bit about tribulations. And how people, when they talk about the rapture, they talk about that Jesus is going to come back. He's going to take an earthly throne. And there's going to be 7 years of tribulations. And it's going to be bad. And then there's going to be another 7 years of really, really, really bad times. Okay? And the people, they take these verses here and they twist them and turn them for what they want. And we'll talk about that later. But he said that here in verse 13, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. And what they believe is if you can endure these first 7 years of tribulations, then you'll be saved there. If you weren't saved when Jesus came at the beginning, you'll be saved at this time point, okay? But I wanted to point that out. Verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything from his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been seen in the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor even shall be. And again, this is where they take out the second 7 years being more and being worse than the first 7. Verse 21. Verse 22. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christ and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Okay, and again, we're going to see these false prophets during our time frame. Then verse 26. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathering together. And again, Jesus is talking in these verses and all the whole chapter for us to be ready. In verses 9 through 28, Jesus tells us, or tells them about the tribulations they are going to face personally. The bad times that will come when Jerusalem is destroyed. And the bad times and tribulations that the world will face before he comes back again. There are a lot of people and religious groups who use Matthew 24 to believe in what denomination churches call as the rapture. Jesus will come back and take the saved to heaven. Or as we read on the next slide, the ready. Then there will be the 7 years of bad times followed by another 7 years. But again, this is what people are believing, and we're going to get into that here in these next few slides. The rapture, I'm sure everybody has heard of that. And I looked on the internet and I found these two descriptions of it. From Wikipedia.com, it says the rapture is an eschatological concept of a minority of Christians, particularly within the branches of American evangelism. So this isn't an idea that's around the world. It is something that has been generated in the U.S. Okay? Considering of an end-time event when all Christian believers who are alive, along with the resurrected believers, will rise in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Now, we've been studying here recently about the second coming of God, of Jesus, and to me, this fits. What it's saying here in this top paragraph is scriptural. Jesus is going to come back in the heavens with his angels, and the believers and the the believers and those who are in the grave are going to rise. The sea's going to give up their dead, and they're going to go to heaven with Christ. That statement is true. But now when you go on the second paragraph, I took this off of the BillyGraham.com website. It says, in this view, the rapture, which is a transformation and catching up of all Christians, dead or alive, to meet Christ in the air, okay, no problems with that, will be secret. Will be secret. For it will be unknown to the world of unbelievers at the time of its happening. The effect of this removal in the absence of multitudes of people will, of course, be evident on earth. So how is it a secret if everybody's going to know that people are gone? Doesn't make sense, does it? I don't know if you've ever watched the Kirk Cameron movie Left Behind. And I watched it just to see what it was about. And it starts off with Kirk, I think if I remember correctly, riding in a plane. And he's talking to his wife, and he looks out the window, and she doesn't respond, and he looks back, and she's gone. It's just her clothes sitting in the seat. And he looks around, and people are all excited and everything because, people are gone from around the airplane. And luckily, I can't remember if it was the pilot or the co-pilot, was still there. So they were able to land. And then it goes on through the movie talking about the 7 years, of tribulation and everything. And understand, again, like we saw up here in this first paragraph, this is something that was created in America. You do not find the rapture, the term rapture. We do see, as we saw the first paragraph, what it is true. But as far as the 7 years of tribulation, with Christ coming down and living on the earth, coming down in silent or in secret, taking a heavenly throne or an earthly throne, which is what they want, and then you having 7 years of bad times, and if you survive that, then you can go take the second trip to heaven, okay? And then there's another 7 years, and if you can survive that, then you can go to heaven. Nowhere do we have second and third chances of being saved and making it through tribulations in order to make it to heaven. You don't see that. And we've studied the scriptures, okay? So I'm not going to go over them again this morning, all right? But that's what people believe. That's what a large section of the people believe in the rapture and having the trouble, the tribulations and all that. What I think Jesus is talking about here is things that's going to happen before he comes back. Once. Okay? And we'll see that as we go through Matthew 24. I took this off of the raptureready.com page. The pre-tribulation rapture of the church will occur when Jesus returns to earth right before the 7-year tribulation. All those who are not ready will be left behind. That's the name of that movie. This website is the most complete resource for understanding end times prophecies, news related to the last days. You will find current news reports, articles, and biblically based information with the emphasis on prophecy. For those who remain and must endure the tribulation, okay, we have information on how to become tribulation saints. In other words, how to survive those 7 years. RaptureReady.com features articles from prophetic end times experts, scholars, and writers that explain what will happen during the tribulation, as well as articles on a variety of topics related to the books in the Bible. Our ultimate goal is to teach visitors about the saving grace that comes when you allow Jesus Christ to become your personal Savior. Does this sound kind of like what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24, that there's going to be people claiming to be Jesus, there are going to be people claiming that he's here, he's there, proclaiming what to do and how to deal with it? Brothers and sisters, it's happening today. It's happening today. Okay? So again, we need to beware. Let's get back to Matthew 24. As we read these verses, I want you to study them with an open mind and heart and see what it is that Jesus is actually saying. Verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Immediately after the tribulation. He's not talking about 7 years, okay? He's talking about the hard times that we just looked at in the verses preceding to this, of where they were going to be tortured, where they were going to be died, where Jerusalem was going to come down, and all this, okay? After that, which is true, okay? Verse 30, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Okay? So this is what's going to happen. Okay? There's going to be a darkening of the skies. The moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven. But then, Jesus is going to appear with his angels, with the trumpets. And he's going to descend from heaven to collect those who are saved, those who have done his will, those who have died and gone on. All of them are going to be collected and taken to heaven. And you've seen this picture before. And I'm going to tell you, read your Bible and understand what it is telling us. Jesus talks about coming to earth a second time for this, for the gathering of the saints. The scriptures nowhere state that he will come back to claim the saved and take an earthly throne to rule on the earth for 7 years of tribulation. Nowhere can that be found. But there are those who have falsely interpreted that scenario from these verses here in Matthew 24. And I hope you can see where that is false and what is actually going to happen. "13 slides, and we haven't even gotten into our first parable this morning. I wouldn't classify this as a parable because it doesn't have the normal storyline that a parable does. But who am I to argue with Jesus? Jesus states in the first part here of this parable, verse 32, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches have already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near." I don't know if any of you have ever had a fig tree. When we lived in North Carolina, we had a little small, scrappy little thing. And it might produce a few leaves. It never really blossomed out. And it would give me maybe 3 or 4 figs a year. But I love figs. Now, sometimes I have seen some in North Carolina that were huge. They were 30, 40 feet tall, massive trees, just loaded with figs. But the statement here is understandable. When a fig tree starts getting leaves, what's happening? Summer is coming. Now, what happens when, a big fig tree or an oak tree or whatever loses all of its leaves? Winter is coming, So he's stating kind of an obvious thing. When you see this happening, summer is coming. Verse 33, "So you also, when you see all of these things, know that it is near, that is at the door. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away." Heaven and earth will pass away. They will be destroyed with fire. In 2 Peter 3, verse 7. "But the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and prediction of ungodly men." People think that these verses are giving us a time frame as to when Jesus is going to come back again. Read the verses with an open mind. See what Jesus is saying. He is describing what is going to happen just before he descends. And it will be more apparent here as we keep going in these verses. Verse 29. Let's look at these again. "Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn as they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." Okay? So, this is coming. Just like summer's here, just like fall's going to come, Lord willing, winter's going to come, Lord willing. We know for sure that Jesus will be coming again. Let's move on to verse 36. These next two slides deal with what Jesus is saying between the two parables. But on that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven. Period. So that lady over in Montana who called her name prophet, and she said, well, today is going to be, at noon, today is going to be the end of times. How can she know that when the angels in heaven don't even know? And why would God, as she claimed, tell her the day and the time when he won't even tell his son? Again, false prophets. We do not know when this is going to happen. And we're not going to know. So we're not going to see things leading up to this event. I think when it's time, when God turns to his son and said, son, go get your bride, that's when things are going to start changing. That's when the sun's going to be darkened. That's when everything's going to happen. And it's not going to be a secret. The whole world is going to know. But the thing we don't know is when. But my Father only knows. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. So what they said in that movie, Left Behind, to where, 2 people sitting in the airplane, one's going to be taken, one's left. That's true. That's scriptural. We read that right here. 2 men are going to be out in the field working. One's going to turn to the other one and he's not going to be there. 2 women will be grinding mill. One will be taken, one will be left. Okay? Those that are taken are the saved ones that are going to go meet Jesus in the sky. Okay? But know this, verse 43, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Isn't that true? If you know that, hey, tonight at 10 o'clock somebody's going to be trying to break into your house, you're going to be ready for him. You're going to be ready for him. But we don't know when that's going to happen. That's the reason we have dogs. That's the reason we have fences. That's the reason we have security systems. Okay? To stop that. So the same thing, we don't know when a thief is going to break in. We do not know when the Lord's going to come back. Verse 44, therefore also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Whoops, I'm sorry, I was one left off. 2 off. I'm sorry, did I miss those? Somebody tell me when I'm off one. I try to watch them back here when they move, and sometimes I can't read them. So somebody raise their hand or tell me, clear your throat so I can look at it. But the case is, the point here that Jesus is trying to make is to be ready. Always be ready. Because we do not know when that is going to be. But the only way that we can be ready is to live our lives in a way that when that time comes, when that second happens, that we are ready to be called into heaven with our Lord and Savior. Then Jesus goes on to the next parable here in verse 45. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly I say to you, that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and to drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay? You didn't understand what Jesus was teaching so far. So he's going to put it into a different parable that maybe you will understand. A simple earth story with an earthly meaning that you will understand. The servant here are Christians who are found faithful and are willing to do the Master's will. He has put us over the household to share the good news of Jesus to the world, so that when Jesus comes again, he will reward us with a home in heaven. But the evil servant who didn't do his Lord's bidding will be punished with hell, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, when Jesus comes again at an hour that nobody knows. Again, brothers and sisters, we have got to be ready. We have got to be ready for when that time comes. And then the last parable this morning in Matthew 25, starting in verse 1, when the kingdom of heaven, when the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise servant answered, saying, "No, lest there should be not enough for us and you. But go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." You didn't understand the first parable? Okay, here's the second one. Didn't understand that one? Here's the third that hopefully maybe you will understand. And the point of the wedding feast with the 10 virgins, 5 of them were smart, they were ready, they had extra oil in case the wedding feast went too long. And then 5 foolish virgins who, you know what, we only need what's in our lamp, we don't need extra oil, it's not going to be a long wedding. They were not ready. And then sure enough, the wedding feast goes longer, and the 5 were ready because they had oil. And the 5 who didn't had to go get oil, and they missed the feast because of that. And when they came and knocked on the door saying, "Let us in, we have our oil, we're here," too late. Again, one chance. That kind of goes against what they say with the rapture and there being 7 years. You know, he'll come and you have those who are saved. Then you have 7 years, and if you survive that, then you have a second chance to go to heaven. But, you know, if you didn't make it that time, you have another 7 years, and if you can make it through this really, really hard tribulation times, then you have a third chance. Nope. You have one chance. One chance. Not 2, not 3. That, brothers and sisters, is what the scriptures state. So, what's the message? Be ready. Be ready. Be ready. Be ready. Don't know how many times I can say it. It's up to us to be ready. The first parable this morning dealt with how you could tell summer is coming by the fig tree starting to have leaves. And the same is true about God coming, or the Lord coming and descending to collect the Christians. who have remained faithful and who have done his will. The second parable this morning dealt with the wise and foolish servants. The wise did what he was supposed to do while his master was away and was ready for his return, whereas the second servant didn't believe his master was going to return anytime soon and lived the wrong life and was punished because of that. And then the third parable dealt with the five wise virgins and the five foolish. But all three of these is telling us again that we need to be ready. Jesus is coming back. He is going to come back the second time. And he's going to claim his bride. Those who have lived the faithful life. Those who have done what they're supposed to do. Those who have done the will of our Father in heaven. And he will take us to heaven. But I can't stress it enough, brothers and sisters, that we have to be ready. Because if we're not ready, we do not get a second chance. So we need to live our life correctly, like we were talking about this morning in our class. Our spirit is constantly in battle with our flesh. God is constantly in battle with the devil, trying to get our soul. And it is up to us to do the things that we're supposed to do. And we'll study next week the fruits of the Spirit and what we need to have in our life every single day. Because when we go into the life thinking, I've got tomorrow, I've got next week, he's not going to come, we're at wrong. So brothers and sisters, make sure that we are always ready. And if there are those here this morning who are not ready, we are here for you to help you to be ready and to always be ready. Just let your wishes be known as this morning.